Hey, it's Tuesday, ready to read. We've got a special guest here today. It's Cookie, the hamster. She's hiding, but I think she'll come out if I get the treats out. Let's see. Treats. Cookie. Come on, girl. Come on, Cookie. Oh, sorry. Okay. She puts them in her pocket and saves them for later. See you, buddy. All right. You might see that her food bowl's empty. I will feed her, I promise. Okay, so today we're reading pages 93 to 100. Look how cute she is. Anyway, okay. So we're reading 93 to 100. Okay, so starting at the top of 93. And if you remember last time, Ellie and his dad walked/ran 20-ish miles or so from Buna to Gliwice. Gliwice was also in Poland. It was like pretty close to Auschwitz. It was another camp, and they've run there. In the part where we're about to read, they like just kind of shoved into a barrack. So if you imagine, like if you have ever been somewhere that was really, really crowded and like everyone shoved together and you like almost couldn't control where you went, right? You just get like dragged along by the crowd. It's like that. So they get all shoved into one building, like super tight, not enough room for everyone. And they can't like control like where they go or where their body moves. So that's kind of what happens at this part. So starting at the top of 93. Okay. The capos quickly settled us into the barrack. There was shoving and jostling as if this were the ultimate haven, the gateway to life. People trod over numbed bodies, trampled wounded faces. There were no cries, only a few moans. My father and I were thrown to the ground by this rolling tide. From beneath me came a desperate cry. "You're crushing me. Have mercy." The voice was familiar. "You're crushing me. Mercy. Have mercy." The same faint voice, the same cry I'd heard somewhere before. This voice had spoken to me one day. When? Years ago? No, it must have been in the camp. Mercy. Knowing that I was crushing him, preventing him from breathing, I wanted to get up and disengage myself to allow him to breathe. But I myself was crushed under the weight of other bodies. I had difficulty breathing. I dug my nails into unknown faces. I was biting my way through, searching for air. No one cried out. Suddenly I remembered. Juliak, the boy from Warsaw who played the violin in the Buna Orchestra. "Juliak, is that you?" "Eliezer, the 25 whiplashes? Yes, I remember." He fell silent. A long moment went by. "Juliak, can you hear me, Juliak?" "Yes," he said feebly. "What do you want?" He was not dead. "Are you all right, Juliak?" I asked, less to know his answer than to hear him speak, to know he was alive. "All right, Eliezer, all right. Not too much air. Tired. My feet are swollen. It's good to rest, but my violin..." I thought he'd lost his mind. His violin here? "What about your violin?" He was gasping. I'm afraid they'll break my violin. I brought it with me." I could not answer him. Someone had lain down on top of me, smothering me. I couldn't breathe through my mouth or my nose. Sweat was running down my forehead and my back. This was it, the end of the road. A silent death, suffocation. No way to scream, to call for help. I tried to rid myself of my invisible assassin. My whole desire to live became concentrated in my nails. I scratched, I fought for a breath of air. I tore at decaying flesh that did not respond. I could not free myself of that mass weighing down my chest. Who knows, was I struggling with a dead man? I shall never know. All I can say is that I prevailed. I succeeded in digging a hole in that wall of dead and dying people, a small hole through which I could drink a little air. "Father, are you there?" I asked as soon as I was able to utter a word. I knew that he could not be far from me. "Yes," a voice replied from far away, as if from another world. "I'm trying to sleep." He was trying to sleep. Could one fall asleep here? Wasn't it dangerous to lower one's guard even for a moment when death could strike at any time? Those were my thoughts when I heard the sound of a violin. A violin in a dark barrack where the dead were piled on top of the living. Who was this madman who played the violin here at the edge of his own grave? Or was it a hallucination? It had to be Juliek. He was playing a fragment of a Beethoven concerto. Never before had I heard such a beautiful sound in such silence. How had he succeeded in disengaging himself to slip out from under my body without my feeling it? The darkness enveloped us. All I could hear was the violin. It was as if Juliek's soul had become his bow. He was playing his life. His whole being was gliding over the strings, his unfulfilled hopes, his charred past, his extinguished future. He played that which he would never play again. I shall never forget Juliek. How could I forget this concert given before an audience of the dead and dying? Even today, when I hear that particular piece by Beethoven, my eyes close, and out of the darkness emerges the pale and melancholy face of my Polish comrade bidding farewell to an audience of dying men. I don't know how long he played. I was overcome by sleep. When I awoke at daybreak, I saw Juliek facing me, hunched over, dead. Next to him lay his violin, trampled, an eerily poignant little corpse. We stayed in Gliwice for 3 days. Days without food or water. We were forbidden to leave the barrack. The door was guarded by the SS. I was hungry and thirsty. I must have been very dirty and disheveled, to judge by what the others looked like. The bread we had brought from Buna had been devoured long since, and who knew when we would be given another ration? The front followed us. We could again hear the cannons very close by, but we no longer had the strength or the courage to think that the Germans would run out of time, that the Russians would reach us before we could be evacuated. We learned that we would be moved to the center of Germany. On the 3rd day at dawn, we were driven out of the barrack. We threw blankets over our shoulders like prayer shawls. We were directed to a gate that divided the camp in two. A group of SS officers stood waiting. A word flew through our ranks: selection. The SS officers who were doing this selection. The weak to the left, those who walked well to the right. My father was sent to the left. I ran after him. An SS officer shouted at my back, "Come back." I inched my way through the crowd. Several SS men rushed to find me, creating such confusion that a number of people were able to switch over to the right, among them my father and I. Still, there were gunshots and some dead. We were led out of the camp. After a half-hour march, we arrived in the very middle of a field, crossed by railroad tracks. This was where we were to wait for the train's arrival. Snow was falling heavily. We were forbidden to sit down or to move. A thick layer of snow was accumulating on our blankets. We were given bread, the usual ration. We threw ourselves on it. Someone had the idea of quenching his thirst by eating snow. Soon we were all imitating him. As we were not permitted to bend down, we took out our spoons and ate the snow off our neighbors' backs. A mouthful of bread and a spoonful of snow. The SS men who were watching were greatly amused by the spectacle. The hours went by. Our eyes were tired from staring at the horizon, waiting for the liberating train to appear. It arrived only very late that evening. An infinitely long train composed of roofless cattle cars. The SS shoved us inside, 100 per car. We were so skinny. When everybody was on board, the convoy left. This is 98. Pressed tightly against one another in an effort to resist the cold, our heads empty and heavy, our brains a whirlwind of decaying memories, our minds numb with indifference. Here or elsewhere, what did it matter? Die today or tomorrow or later. The night was growing longer, never-ending. When at last a grayish light appeared on the horizon, it revealed a tangle of human shapes, heads sunk deeply between the shoulders, crouching, piled one on top of the other, like a cemetery covered with snow. In the early dawn light, I tried to distinguish between the living and those who were no more, but there was barely a difference. My gaze remained fixed on someone who, eyes wide open, stared into space. His colorless face was covered with a layer of frost and snow. My father had huddled near me, draped in his blanket, shoulders laden with snow. What if he were dead as well? I called out to him. No response. I would have screamed if I could have. He was not moving. Suddenly, the evidence overwhelmed me. There was no longer any reason to live, any reason to fight. The train stopped in an empty field. The abrupt halt had wakened a few sleepers. They stood, looking around, startled. Outside, the SS walked by, shouting, "Throw out all the dead. Outside, all the corpses." The living were glad. They would have more room. Volunteers began the task. They touched those who had remained on the ground. "Here's one. Take him." The volunteers undressed him and eagerly shared his garments. Then 2 grave diggers grabbed him by the head and feet and threw him from the wagon like a sack of flour. They were shouting all around. "Come on, here's another. My neighbor, he's not moving." I woke from my apathy only when 2 men approached my father. I threw myself on his body. He was cold. I slapped him. I rubbed his hands, crying, "Father, Father, wake up. They're going to throw you outside." His body remained inert. The 2 gravediggers had grabbed me by the neck. "Leave him alone. Can't you see that he's dead?" "No," I yelled. "He's not dead. Not yet." And I started to hit him harder and harder. At last, my father half opened his eyes. They were glassy. He was breathing faintly. "You see?" I cried. The 2 men went away. 20 corpses were thrown from our wagon. Then the train resumed its journey, leaving in its wake, in a snowy field in Poland, hundreds of naked orphans without a tomb. We received no food. We lived on snow, took the place of bread. The days resembled the nights, and the nights left in our souls the dregs of their darkness. The train rolled slowly, often halted for a few hours, and continued. It never stopped snowing. We remained lying on the floor for days and nights, one on top of the other, never uttering a word. We were nothing but frozen bodies, our eyes closed. We merely waited for the next stop to unload our dead. There followed days and nights of traveling. Occasionally, we would pass through German towns, usually very early in the morning. German laborers were going to work. They would stop and look at us without surprise. One day, when we had come to a stop, a worker took a piece of bread out of his bag and threw it into a wagon. There was a stampede. Dozens of starving men fought desperately over a few crumbs. The worker watched the spectacle with great interest. Years later, I witnessed a similar spectacle in Aden. Our ship's passengers amused themselves by throwing coins to the natives, who dove to retrieve them. An elegant Parisian lady took great pleasure in this game. When I noticed 2 children desperately fighting in the water, one trying to strangle the other, I implored the lady, "Please don't throw any more coins." "Why not?" said she. "I like to give charity." Okay, that's the end of our reading for today. Things to think about, so when they get on the train, they don't know where they're going, right? So they get on the train, and he said they were roofless cattle cars. So no roof, right? So again, it's January, it's cold, 100 people per cattle car with no roof over them. And then when they stop the train and they throw out the dead people, they left them on the side of the train track, out in the field. So they'd taken off their clothes, right? So the other people could put their clothes on. So they threw out naked, dead people out into the field, and then they just left them there. You can imagine, because they tried to throw his dad out, and Ellie's the only reason they didn't throw his dad out. So you can imagine that if there were people who weren't with someone that they knew, that were asleep or kind of half dead or whatever, that some live people got thrown out as well. But when you think about it, they're thrown out naked into winter and just left there. So even if they were alive, they would have died pretty much right after that. So I think that's it. See you tomorrow.